Bonjour, Gikendaasowin. Welcome back to another episode of the Red Lake Nation College Gikendaasowin podcast, a RLNC community space to discuss topics on culture and language, history, student spotlights, and more. This week, we have Red Lake Nation College faculty Sarah Barott, Stephanie Martin, and Ignacio Mendez discussing their individual book picks in celebration of Black History Month. This episode was recorded on February 9th, 2023. Red Lake Nation College would like to thank the National Endowment for the Humanities for their generous support in the creation of this podcast. Miigwech.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to our podcast. We are doing a podcast on Black History Month with the library and the English departments at Red Lake Nation College. Today, we're going to be discussing books by Black authors to celebrate. I have a couple other faculty and staff here with me. I'm Sarah Barott, and I teach English at RLNC.
Hi, my name is Ignacio Mendez. I'm the Director of Library Services here at the Medwaganunan Library.
Hello, I'm Stephanie Martin, and I am English faculty as well at RLNC.
I'm so excited to have everybody here and hear about these books that we've chosen to celebrate. Ignacio is going to go first and share a book with us.
Right, so the book I chose to talk about was The Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison. Now, this book is about this Black man who is the narrator of the book, who calls himself an invisible man. And basically, when we first meet him, he's living in underneath a power company, stealing electricity from the secret basement that only allows for white people. And basically, the gist of the book is that it is basically a man narrating episodically about how being a Black man makes you essentially invisible because of the experiences, stereotypes, and living and working conditions that are imposed about you because of his race.
That sounds really interesting. This is not a book I've ever read before. Have you read this one, Stephanie?
No, I have not, but I've heard of it.
Yeah, I've heard of it, but have never read it. Ignacio, did you enjoy reading this book?
Yes, I did. It was. It's always been one of my favorite classics. It's a very deep and penetrating look at just even from like a narrator perspective, which helps you get closer to the action and what Black people in America can encounter in their everyday lives. For example, in the first chapter, he's basically forced to give out a speech to the community leading white citizens, for example. And basically, they make them fight in a battle royale for money, basically. And that's how he's awarded a scholarship to the state college for Black youth. And then another episode of the book, he basically has to try to give out the letters of recommendation he got in a previous chapter. And then he finds out that he has to basically work another type of job that he didn't quite expect. So it's very episodic. It doesn't. It's a pretty easy read in the sense that even if you can lose yourself a little bit in the thread of one chapter, if you go to the next one, it'll completely change the setting while still keeping the narrator and helping you focus on the events that are happening.
That is awesome. I'm excited to try this one. Anything else you wanted to say about this book or the author?
Yes. So I actually wanted to talk a little bit about the genre of the book. It's basically fiction, and it is considered a classic, but it's also, and this is something that I did a little bit of research on, It's considered in the genre of the Bildungsroman, which in literary criticism is it's a genre book that focuses on the psychological and moral growth of the protagonist from childhood to adulthood, because the book is primarily focused on the character development of the unnamed black protagonist, on how he seeks to define himself, and seeing how much the world tries to define him for what he is, and taking his voice away, basically, essentially making him an invisible man. And this is how and basically the book starts basically at at some point a future part of all the episodes that has happened to him, with him starting to reclaim a sort of identity by just alienating themselves from those who would seek to define them.
That is
Wow.
awesome.
Yeah, that sounds super interesting, doesn't it? Wow.
It does. I'm excited to read this one, and I think it might have to go on my to be read list, which is always growing.
Same here.
Yeah. I'm going to move on. So, the book that I chose for this podcast is Long Way Down by Jason Reynolds. This is a book written in verse. It's young adult fiction, but as an adult, I read it as an adult, and I have to say, I really, really enjoyed it. And I got the description of the book off of Amazon. I'm going to read it to you now. A cannon, a strap, a piece, a biscuit, a burner, a heater, a chopper, a gat, a hammer, a tool for rule. Or you can call it a gun. That's what 15-year-old Will has shoved in the back waistband of his jeans. See, his brother Sean was just murdered, and Will knows the rules. No crying, no snitching, revenge. That's where Will's now heading, with the gun shoved in the back waistband of his jeans. The gun that was his brother's gun. He gets on the elevator on the 7th floor, stoked. He knows who he's after. Or does he? Told in a short, fierce, staccato narrative verse, Long Way Down is a fast and furious, dazzlingly brilliant look at teenage gun violence, as could only be told by Jason Reynolds. What do y'all think about that?
Sarah, I had goosebumps when you were reading that.
Oh, thank you. It's, Jason Reynolds. He is a wonderful, wonderful poet. He's a wonderful writer, and he does a lot for children's literacy.
Like a very powerful, relevant theme, especially in today's
Absolutely. So
Yeah.
The Invisible Man is a book from the 50s, I believe. This book, I think, came out around 2020, somewhere around there. But he won a Newbery Honor. He's won the Coretta Scott King Honor. He was the Times Best Young Adult Book of all time, and an Entertainment Weekly Best Young Adult Book of 2017. So he's won a lot of honors for his work, and he's really amazing. I think one of the reasons people should look at his work, especially if you're a reluctant reader, is that he didn't read a book until he was in college, but he's now a driving force for children's literacy and literature. I did a little research too, and a New York Times article was titled Jason Reynolds is on a Mission. And it states the first book he read was by Walter Dean Myers, the famous young adult author, and was called The Young Landlords. And Reynolds said that it chemically changed him because it gave him permission to draw from the stories of his friends and family and write the way they speak. So I thought that was really amazing that he does bring in a different kind of voice. He has some other great books, Stamped, Racism, Anti-Racism, and You. Ain't Burned All the Bright. That's a kind of like a graphic novel art book of sorts that I read and really enjoyed. The artwork is beautiful. He wrote Miles Morales' Spider-Man and When I Was the Greatest. I know, right? He has a lot more books.
I do like Miles.
I do. I know. I really like Spider-Man. So
Miles, the character, is Puerto Rican like me.
yeah, he is. He is Puerto Rican. And I just really think that Jason Reynolds has a lot to say. I have 3 quotes from him that I just wanted to quickly read before we moved on. One is, there's nothing you can do in life if you can't read. Reading is an activity for you to know that you're not alone and you don't have to be ashamed of who you are. The world is big and small, and books help us navigate this big and small space. So that was the first quote. Really love that one. The second one was, I don't want you to lead a reluctant life. In order for you to not live a reluctant life, you need to be able to engage with language. And then the third quote that I really liked from him, it was from the New York Times article. He said, I can talk directly to them, he's talking about students, in a way that I know they're going to relate to because I am them and I still feel like them. So I think he's a wonderful author and I highly recommend his books. Has anyone here read any of his books or heard of Jason Reynolds?
I have not.
Ignacio, have you?
I haven't either, but after seeing the pedigree of his work, I must definitely seek him out.
Yeah, he's wonderful. I really enjoy it. I read this work with teenagers when I was teaching high school, and I gotta say, it's effective. It's a really effective book. It gets your emotions and it looks at issues that are important today. So yeah, that's my recommendation. Stephanie, we would love to hear your recommendation.
Okay. Well, last summer I interned at the Northwoods Writers Conference at Bemidji State University, and Claudia Rankine was one of the visiting established authors. And I bought her book, and I never had a chance to read it. Life, it's busy, and you're reading other things. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to finally read this. So it's called Just Us: An American Conversation. The author is Claudia Rankine. And the genre of the book, biography, memoir, literature on racism. So Claudia Rankine, she's a poet, essayist, and playwright. She co-founded the Racial Imaginary Institute, which is committed to the activation of interdisciplinary work and an exploration of race in our lives. She's a former professor at Yale University and is currently a professor of creative writing at New York University. So in Just Us, Claudia Rankine invites the reader into a conversation about whiteness in America. So in this book, she ponders questions like, what would it take for us to breach the silence, guilt, and violence that arise from addressing whiteness for what it is? What are the consequences if we keep avoiding this conversation? And also, what might it look like if we step into it? So she feels this is a necessary, conversation to be had. So this,
Yeah.
right. So this collection of essays, poems, documents, and even images in her book disrupts the false comfort of our culture's liminal and private spaces, places like the airport. She talks about, dinner parties with her white coworkers and friends, even an instance at the theater. So where neutrality and politeness deflect true engagement in our shared problems, Rankine makes art out of the voices and rebuttals of others. She writes about white men responding to and with their white male privilege. So she writes about the inability to acknowledge white privilege, even in the case of some of her white friends she's known for over 20 years, who she thought understood her views on whiteness and racism. This book is a crucial call to challenge our vexed reality of society. So that's a brief description
That
of,
sounds amazing.
it's really interesting. And it was just,
Quite breathtaking.
yeah, it was wonderful to read. So I guess I'll just start where the book begins, with her discussing how she was teaching a whiteness studies class in 2016 and how her students, which she added included just about every race, gender identity, sexual orientation, interviewed white people on campus or in their families about their understanding of American history and how it relates to whiteness. So then she thought about doing something similar. She says in her book, I wondered what it would mean to ask random white men how they understood their privilege. So it's very interesting, the responses she gets. And it's just,
Yeah.
at some points it's humorous, at some points it's shocking. I mean, you feel kind of everything when you're reading this.
Mm.
At first she was hesitant. She wondered things like, would they react like the police captain in Plainfield, Indiana did when his female colleague told him during a diversity training session that he benefited from white privilege? In that instance, he became angry and accused her of using a racialized slur against him. She was placed on administrative leave and it was placed in her file. She thought, would I too be accused? And this book, I have to mention too, is really, I love it because it tells about, instances like that,
Mhm.
specific examples that,
Yeah,
someone like myself would otherwise, not know about.
exactly.
So it's just really, really good. I can't even begin to how much to express how much I like this book. So
Yeah, this is great. I'm loving how it's kind of like pulling the covers back on like
mhm.
whiteness, because a lot of people talk about race like like it's black people and you need to study being black. But in reality, I think a lot of times white people need to stop and examine um their privilege. And it's something that it's a way the conversation isn't always focused that way, where we need to look at whiteness also. You can't just look at blackness. You need to see both.
Yes.
So I really think this book would be great for me too. I haven't read this one, but I want to.
It's pretty new. It was published in 2020. But yeah, it's really good. So she talks about how the running comment, she says in her book specifically, quote, the running comment in our current political climate is that we all need to converse with people we don't normally speak to. And although my husband is white, I found myself falling into easy banter with all kinds of strangers except white men. They rarely sought me out to shoot the breeze, and I did not seek them out. Maybe it was time to engage, even if these encounters seemed outlandish. I wanted to try. So she was afraid and hesitant. She was hesitant because of occurrences such as this, for example. She talks about how she stood in line. She's in airports a lot because she's an author. So she, talks to people at airports or on the airplane a lot, as most people do when you're traveling. So she says, I stood in line for a flight across the country, and a white man stepped in front of me. He was with another white man. Excuse me, I said, I am in this line. He stepped behind me, but not before saying to his flight mate, you never know who they're letting into first class these days. During the
Oh,
flight, each time, yeah. So during the flight, each time he removed or replaced something, she said, like while they were on the plane, like in his case overhead, he looked over at me, she says. And each time I looked up from my book to meet his gaze and smiled. I like to think I'm not humorless. So little things like this, I just like her personality.
yeah,
Um,
it really shines through in the writing.
yeah, it's really cool. So, and then she says, I try to imagine what my presence was doing to him. On some
Mhm.
level, I thought, I must have dirtied up his narrative of white privilege securing white spaces.
That
So
sounds really good. I have got to read this book. I'm gonna have to borrow a copy from you, I think, Stephanie.
Okay, yeah, definitely. So she talks a
Oh,
lot about white spaces. She talks about spaces
yeah.
that many whites act like are theirs and only theirs. Um, she talks about whiteness and white privilege, not with only random strangers, but also her white friends, male and female. So
Mhm.
I love her because she's a sociologist. She's trying to figure out people and society and how it works. Um, Rightfully so. So she also wonders why and how white people can't realize this, like how they don't have to worry or even think about things that she does as a Black woman. She doesn't understand how they don't see that. Then she realizes that even some of her closest white friends live in a totally different mindset in a totally different world than she does,
Yeah.
even if they do share the same spaces.
I think that's really interesting, especially going back to Ignacio's book, The Invisible Man,
Yeah,
where like a lot of people in these white spaces end up feeling invisible or out of place. And that shouldn't be. And I think that books that examine why that is and the invisibility are so important to push things into the forefront and make them visible.
right.
Yeah,
No, excellent, excellent book. I'm so excited. Ignacio, can you tell everybody where we can access books at RLNC?
for sure. So you got two options. You can either visit our library, Medwaganunan Library at the Red Lake Nation College campus, or you can access it through Cloud Library with either your Populi ID or Student ID. which
Oh,
grants you access
awesome.
to thousands and thousands of books.
That's so great. I love e-readers are so convenient.
Mhm.
I know, Stephanie, you're also supporting people with English in the writer's room is that correct?
Yeah, the Writing and Learning Resource Center.
Yeah, thank you. When are you doing that?
Well, I teach on Mondays and Wednesdays on campus. So I teach from 10 to 11:30. So right after that 11:30 class, I shoot right over there, and I'm there usually till about 1:45.
That's awesome. And I know Stephanie and myself and Ignacio will always be more than willing to give you some great book recommendations. This is just a small sampling of all the great books that we have to recommend to people. So step in, see Stephanie, see Ignacio, come down to the RLNC site, RLNC Minneapolis site, and see me. I did just want to say one of the reasons we encourage reading so much is because reading gives you better focus, reading strengthens your vocabulary, and studies show that reading actually grows empathy. So when you read, you become more empathetic. And because we want to focus on younger people as well, we decided to bring in a book for kids. So, for kids this month, we recommend Little Leaders Bold Women in Black History by Vashti Harrison. You can learn with your littles about Little Leader Educates and how it inspires and relates to true stories of 40 trailblazing Black women in American history. Illuminating text is paired with irresistible illustrations to bring to life bold and iconic and lesser known female figures of Black histories, such as abolitionist Sojourner Truth, pilot Bessie Coleman, chemist Alice Ball, politician Shirley Chisholm, mathematician Katherine Johnson, poet Maya Angelou, and filmmaker Julie Dash. So I just thought that book sounded amazing. There's heroes, role models, and everyday women who did extraordinary things. The leaders in this book might be little, but they all did something big and amazing, inspiring generations to come. So that's a great book you can check out. Just a reminder to all the awesome parents out there. According to an article from WCCO9 ABC News out of Cincinnati, starting in kindergarten, if a student reads 20 minutes a day at home, they will hear 1.8 million words per year, and they will have read for 851 hours by sixth grade. So on standardized tests, they will likely score better than 90% of their peers. This is compelling data on the beliefs of encouraging your child to read. So great book for you to go and check out at any of our local libraries or purchase. And read with your little ones or your friends or other family members. I do want to say thank you to my co-hosts for joining us, Stephanie, Ignacio. Awesome to see you.
Thank you for having us, Sarah.
Yes,
Yeah,
thank you.
yeah, it was so wonderful to learn about some new books. We really hope that everyone enjoys these stories as much as we did, and that you're able to learn more about the Black experience in America. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us this week. If you enjoyed the episode, please give us a thumbs up and follow us for more content. A special chimigwich to the following for their efforts in the creation of this Red Lake Nation College Gikendaasowin podcast episode. Opening and closing music by RLNC Director of Equity, Cultural Education and Archives, Floyd Buck-Jourdain. Opening, introduction, and closing by RLNC student Nenokazi Rebecca Peterson. Our hosts this week, RLNC instructors Sarah Barott and Stephanie Martin, and RLNC Library Director Ignacio Mendez. Production by RLNC IT Director Josh Nelson. And a special thanks to the National Endowment for the Humanities for their generous support. Gigawabamin, and we'll see you next week.